I'm not sure what gave it away first, the look in her eyes or the hand that shouldn't have been there. My name's Eric. I'm 41, live in Portland, and work as a senior logistics analyst for a freight coordination company. Sounds thrilling, I know. My days are full of shipment numbers, transit routes, and spreadsheet formulas that only make sense to a very particular breed of person. But I liked it. It made sense. It was structured, reliable, predictable. For the longest time, I thought my marriage was the same. Brooke and I met 14 years ago outside a bookstore that doesn't exist anymore. She was the kind of woman who looked like she was always halfway through an idea, always on the edge of some great inspiration. She taught design at a local college, typography, layout theory, the kind of stuff I could barely pretend to understand. But I liked the way she talked about it. Animated, passionate, alive. We got married 2 years after we met in a small ceremony under a redwood canopy in California. It rained that day. Brooke said it made everything more cinematic. I just remember being grateful she said yes. She had a way of pulling people into her orbit like gravity. I was never the center of the room, but with her beside me, I didn't have to be. For 12 years, we built a life that, on the surface, looked exactly like what people dreamed of. A cozy house with a porch that creaked just enough to feel charming. 2 rescue cats, Benny and June, who ruled the place like it was theirs, and we were just long-term guests. Weekend getaways to the coast, brunches with friends, inside jokes about old sitcoms we'd binge late at night. Our fridge was covered in magnets from every national park we visited together, a visual scrapbook of our shared history. Glacier, Zion, Olympic. There were always plans to hit the next one. Always something ahead to look forward to. But that night, our 12th anniversary, was the moment everything stopped feeling steady. I had planned something small but thoughtful. She wasn't the type who needed grand gestures. So I ordered takeout from her favorite Thai spot across town, the kind of place where the food is better than it has any right to be and the owner still remembers your usual. I set the table with real plates instead of our mismatched set of chipped IKEA ones. I even cleaned up the back patio and hung up some string lights. And I had a surprise, a photo album I'd been working on quietly over the past few months. It had pictures from every year we'd been together, little captions I'd written by hand under each one. Moments that had meant something. I figured it would catch her off guard in a good way. I even found an old vinyl of our wedding song, a slow, dreamy track by an indie band we'd both loved in college. It took me 2 weeks of digging online to find a copy that didn't cost a fortune. It arrived the day before our anniversary, like fate was lining everything up for me. That morning, Brooke kissed me on the cheek and said, "Don't wait up, okay? Ashley's throwing her Bachelorette thing tonight. It's just bar hopping, nothing wild." I blinked. "Tonight? You didn't say anything." She shrugged. "It's been on the calendar. I mentioned it like a week ago." I didn't remember her mentioning it. But I also didn't press. That was our thing, we didn't make scenes. We gave each other space. Or maybe that's just the story I told myself every time I swallowed my gut instincts. She left around 6. No hesitation. No questions. Not even a "what do you want to do for dinner?" Just a kiss on the cheek and perfume in the air. I sat in the living room with everything still set on the table, wine breathing, record ready, lights flickering out back. I opened the photo album anyway and looked through it alone. And maybe that was the first real warning bell. Not the big kind that screams disaster, but the dull, echoing kind that you hear too late. I tried not to spiral. I watched a game. Played with the cats. Answered some emails. Then, like any good modern-day fool, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling. That's when I saw it. Ashley had posted a story on Instagram, clips from the night, *TS of drinks, blurry dancing, loud music. The kind of throwaway content that people post without thinking. I tapped through, not expecting anything. But then there it was. A 6-second clip, maybe less. Brooke was sitting in a corner booth, dimly lit, laughing at something off camera. A man was sitting beside her, just the edge of his face visible. You couldn't see much of him, but his hand was resting on her thigh. Casual. Familiar. Brooke didn't flinch. Didn't move away. She leaned in, smiling in that way she used to smile at me. And just like that, everything changed. It wasn't just the physical contact. It was the way she looked, relaxed, open, like she belonged there. Like this wasn't new. Like that moment had happened before and would happen again. My heart didn't break dramatically. It didn't shatter into pieces like some bad romance novel. It just went quiet. Like it was watching too, stunned into silence. I didn't call her. Didn't text. I just stared at the video over and over until Instagram automatically moved on to the next story. She came home around 9 the next morning. Same dress. Same shoes. Same perfect casual tone. Morning, she said, dropping her purse on the table. God, I'm exhausted. We didn't get to bed until like 4. I looked up from my coffee, nodded. Sounds like a long night. Yeah, but fun. Ash was a mess, though. You know how she gets when she drinks gin. I didn't say anything. I just watched her move through the room like everything was normal. Like it was just another day in our so-called perfect life. She didn't mention the guy. Didn't say a word about who sat next to her in that booth. And I didn't ask. Because if I asked, she'd lie. And if she lied, I'd have to decide whether I believed her or not. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I nodded, smiled, and poured her a cup of coffee. The same way I always did. As if nothing had changed. But something had. And deep down, I think we both knew it. That was the moment the narrative shifted, when the life I thought we shared started to split at the seams. Not with an explosion. Not with a confrontation. But with a silent glance, a video frame, a hand on a thigh that wasn't mine. It was the moment I stopped trusting the version of our life I'd been handed. The moment I realized I'd been living in a photograph someone else had taken, one carefully cropped, edited, and filtered to hide the truth. And once you see past the edges of the frame, you can't unsee it. You can't go back. After that night, things didn't implode right away. That's the strange part. You'd expect some loud, cinematic breakdown. A screaming match. A suitcase flung down the stairs. But instead, the betrayal settled in like fog. Quiet. Slow. Thick enough to cloud everything but never loud enough to sound the alarm. Brooke never asked why I seemed distracted. Maybe she thought I didn't notice. Or maybe, and this thought haunted me, maybe she didn't care if I did. That scared me more than anything. Over the following weeks, I started seeing the pieces I'd missed before. Things I had brushed off, rationalized, folded neatly into the narrative of a busy life. Looking back, it felt like I had been trained to dismiss these signs like muscle memory. I'd see a red flag, and instead of reacting, I'd grab a Sharpie and color it beige. Her weekend trips to Seattle were the first thing that began to scratch at the surface. About a year prior, she started attending these design intensives, as she called them. Conferences, she said. Workshops. Creative networking. The first time she brought it up, I was supportive. She was always pushing her professional boundaries, and I admired that about her. But the trips became frequent, once every couple of months at first, then monthly. Sometimes even back-to-back weekends. When I suggested tagging along once, not even to interfere, just to explore the city, she shut it down fast. It's just lectures and client dinners, she said. You'd be bored out of your mind. I remember laughing and letting it go. What did it matter if she needed her space? I trusted her. Or at least I thought I did. But after the photo, after the hand, the smile, the ease, my brain rewound all of it. Played it back, line by line. Every refusal, every vague itinerary, every late return. Then there was the wardrobe shift. Subtle at first, new blouses tucked deep in the closet, heels I hadn't seen her wear out with me. A jacket still in the bag from a high-end boutique downtown. Tags left on longer than usual, as if she wasn't sure she wanted to admit they were hers. I'd find packaging in the trash from skincare brands she never used before. Cologne that wasn't mine lingering on the passenger seat of her car. I kept telling myself I was reading too much into it. But the problem with gaslighting yourself is that eventually the truth gets louder than your excuses. Her phone habits changed next. She started sleeping with it under her pillow or taking it with her into the bathroom like it was an oxygen tank. Notifications stopped lighting up the screen, either silenced or turned off entirely. I only caught one message once when she left the phone face up on the kitchen counter and walked away for a second too long. It was from an unsaved number, no name, just a vague, usual time? Can't wait. She deleted it before I could ask anything. That should have been the breaking point. But instead, I found myself doing the exact thing I used to swear I'd never do, collecting evidence in silence. Not confronting, not accusing. Just watching. I became a quiet observer in my own marriage, piecing together the jigsaw puzzle of a life that suddenly didn't feel like mine. But here's the thing, I refused to put the whole picture together. Because the moment I did, I'd have to admit what I already knew. Brooke wasn't just slipping away. She had already left. Emotionally, maybe physically. The only thing still anchored in our house was the ghost of who we used to be. One night, I walked past her office, the door half open. She was on a video call. Laughed at something someone said in a way that made my stomach turn. Not because she laughed, but because I hadn't seen her laugh like that with me in months. I stood outside the door for a full minute before walking away. I didn't want to know who was on the other end. I didn't want to recognize the voice. When I finally laid down that night, she was already asleep. Or pretending to be. We were two bodies in the same bed, separated by a silence louder than anything we'd ever shouted at each other. I stared at the ceiling and thought, if love is a language, ours had gone mute. The next morning, she left early for a meeting at a co-working space she'd never mentioned before. Said she'd be out most of the day, maybe into the evening. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask with who. I just nodded, and for the first time in a long time I lied back. Okay, I said. Have a good one. And then I sat in the kitchen looking around the house we'd made. The photos on the wall, curated so carefully, suddenly felt like props. Like we were actors in a play we'd long stopped performing. One photo in particular stopped me cold. It was from our 3rd anniversary in Sedona. Brooke had set the camera on a rock and used a timer to snap us in front of the red cliffs, arms around each other, her head on my shoulder. We looked happy. More than happy. Like we had secrets no one else could understand. And now I realized maybe we did. Maybe she always had secrets. And I just mistook my certainty for her loyalty. I didn't have proof. Not the kind you can print out or confront someone with in a dramatic showdown. What I had were inconsistencies. A dozen little fractures that, on their own, meant nothing but together formed a map of something deeper. But here's the hard truth, I wasn't ready to follow that map yet. Because if I found where it led, I knew I'd never come back from it. So I kept the pieces scattered. I didn't line them up. I didn't try to force a fit. I let the puzzle sit in the back of my mind unassembled. Because sometimes the only way to keep going is to pretend you haven't already seen the end of the story. But that only works for so long. And deep down, I knew a reckoning was coming. It was a Tuesday when it happened, not that the day itself mattered. But I remember it was gray outside. One of those Portland afternoons where the clouds feel so low you could reach up and touch them if you tried hard enough. I was supposed to be at the office, buried in a backlog of shipping reports and mid-quarter cost projections. But I'd left my work laptop at home the night before, a rare mistake, and I needed it for a meeting in less than an hour. I didn't call Brooke to let her know I was coming. There was no reason to. She usually had a class until early evening on Tuesdays. I figured I'd be in and out in 5 minutes, grab the laptop, maybe pet the cats, and head back. I pulled into the driveway just past 3. Her car was there. At first, I thought maybe her class got canceled. It happened. But something in my chest tightened anyway. That now familiar pull of dread, like my gut was trying to tell me what my mind didn't want to believe. The front door was unlocked. That was the first thing. The second thing was the voices. Not loud, just present. A low hum of conversation like background music that was never supposed to be heard. One voice was Brooke's. The other was male, unfamiliar, but relaxed. Easy. And then came the laughter. I stood frozen in the entryway, one hand still on the doorknob, trying to make sense of the sounds. Maybe it was a colleague. Maybe it was just a casual meeting. Maybe. But no. There was something in her laugh, not just the sound of it, but the rhythm. Like it was rehearsed. Like it had been played out before. I stepped quietly down the hallway. Benny, our older cat, peeked at me from under the dining table and then disappeared into the other room as if sensing something was off. And then I saw them. Brooke was sitting on the living room couch, our couch, in a dress I'd never seen before. It wasn't flashy. It was simple, elegant. The kind of thing you wear when you want to look like you didn't try, even though you did. Her legs were folded under her, tucked to the side in that casual way that always used to look so endearing. And beside her was a man, tall, clean-cut, mid-30s maybe. Button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to show forearms and knees. He sat close. Too close. His hand rested lightly on her knee. Not possessive, not aggressive. Familiar. They were sharing pizza from our favorite local place. 2 glasses of red wine. A half-finished bottle on the coffee table. His jacket draped over the back of the chair. Like he belonged there. Like this was normal. Brooke leaned into him slightly as he spoke. Her mouth curling into a smile I hadn't seen in months. And I just stood there. I didn't speak. Didn't move. Something primal in me wanted to storm in, to shout, to demand, to force the moment to acknowledge itself. But instead I watched. And in those few seconds, I realized something even more painful than the obvious. She looked happy. Not fake happy. Not the forced smiles she gave me when I asked if everything was okay. This was the kind of contentment that comes from routine, from repetition, from comfort. This wasn't a one-time slip. This was a pattern. I turned around without making a sound. My footsteps were silent against the hardwood floor. My breath steady even though everything inside me was spiraling. By the time I reached the porch, the wind had picked up. It rustled the wind chimes Brooke had hung last spring, the ones I used to tease her about for being too loud. Now, they sounded like a warning. I got in my car and drove. Nowhere in particular. Just away. My phone buzzed once. A meeting reminder. And I turned it over in the cup holder, face down. I couldn't face the normal parts of life right now. Not when I just watched the foundation of my reality tilt beneath my feet. Eventually, I found myself parked near Mount Tabor. I used to run there before work in the early years of our marriage, when I believed routine could keep everything steady. Now, it just felt like another version of a life that had quietly unraveled when I wasn't looking. I stayed there for nearly an hour, watching joggers go by, listening to the echo of laughter from kids at the playground. Life kept moving unaware, unaffected, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't go back home that night. I checked into a small motel on the east side, the kind that doesn't ask questions when you pay in cash. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old curtains. There was a desk, a chair, and a bed that sagged in the middle. It was perfect. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. No TV, no music, just silence. What haunted me wasn't the image of them together, though that was burned into my memory. What haunted me was how normal it had looked. How casual. Like they'd done it a dozen times before. Like they knew the rhythm of each other already. I'd always thought betrayal would look violent, explosive, shattering. But this was worse. It was quiet, seamless, undeniably practiced. At some point, I opened the Notes app on my phone and started typing. Not a message, not a confrontation, just thoughts. This house doesn't recognize me anymore. That's what I wrote. And I stared at those words for a long time, because that's what it felt like. Like I'd walked into a story that had already been rewritten without me. A scene I used to be part of, now recast with someone else in my place. When did I stop being her person? Was there a moment I missed? A shift I didn't see? Or had she always been waiting for someone who wasn't me? I didn't know. And worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to. All I knew was that the couch I'd picked out with her 3 years ago now held someone else's presence. That the wine glasses we got from her sister's wedding registry were now props in a scene I wasn't meant to witness. That the house I had once called home no longer knew my name. And neither did she. The motel room I spent that night in was as forgettable as the feeling in my chest was not. The wallpaper was peeling. The light above the desk flickered like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to exist or burn out completely. I lay on the bed in the same clothes I wore to work, one arm draped over my eyes, trying not to feel anything. But that's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't give you the luxury of numbness. Not really. You think you can outsilence it, outstare it, ignore it into oblivion. But it waits, patient, persistent. It burrows under your skin and speaks in the quiet. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and relived every second of what I saw in that living room. The closeness, the ease, the quiet betrayal served on a paper plate between sips of our wine. By sunrise, I was done pretending. I got up, splashed water on my face, and sat down at the desk with the notepad they leave by the telephone. The kind with the motel's logo printed in faded ink at the top. I didn't know what I was going to write. I just knew I had to get something out. What came out wasn't a letter. Not in the traditional sense. It was more like a decision, dressed up in sentences. I wrote slowly, carefully, not because I wanted to be poetic, but because I wanted there to be no confusion. Brooke, I know. I saw you. You don't have to lie or explain. You don't even have to reply. This isn't a trap. I'm not here to shame you, argue, or beg for honesty you already spent. I'm writing to set something straight, something you've quietly taken from me without asking. Choice. You had yours. You made it, whether out loud or in silence. Now it's mine. I'm not going to play the role of the unaware husband anymore. I'm not going to sit across from you at dinner and pretend the silence is cozy. I'm not going to nod through your half-truths or make excuses for your late nights and evasive eyes. You don't owe me love, but I don't owe you comfort either. If freedom is what you want, then take it. Fully. Not halfway. Not in stolen hours and secret texts. You can have the space. You can have the story. But you can't have both me and the lie. By the time you read this, I'll be somewhere that isn't her home. Take whatever time you need. Decide what you want. But know that whatever version of me you were counting on to just keep waiting, he's gone. Eric. I folded the note, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it without rereading it. Some things only make sense once. And if you go over them again, they unravel. I left the motel by 7 a.m. The world looked exactly the same as it had the day before, couples walking dogs, joggers checking their pace, kids waiting for school buses. I hated how normal everything was. I drove across the city and signed a short-term lease on a one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore I used to go to in college. The place was small, barely room for a bed, a table, and a chair, but it had something my house no longer did, stillness that wasn't hiding something. By noon, I was back at the house. I parked on the street this time. Didn't want to give her the image of me pulling into the driveway like I was coming home. Because I wasn't. She wasn't there. I didn't expect her to be. Brooke never missed a Thursday lecture, no matter what was happening. I let myself in and was greeted by the familiar smell of her shampoo and the faint scent of whatever candle she'd been burning lately, something with cedar and citrus that felt almost dishonest now. I walked through each room like it was a crime scene. Not because something violent had happened, but because everything felt like evidence of a life that wasn't real anymore. Our wedding photo on the hallway wall. The his and hers coffee mugs we got as a joke. The bookshelf where our favorite novels sat side by side, their spines worn from being read and reread on rainy afternoons. I went to our bedroom and packed a duffel bag with just what I needed, enough to get by for a few weeks. I didn't take the photo album. I didn't take the record. I left the past untouched because I wanted her to see it. All of it. Everything we had, now emptied of meaning by her choices. I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, right beside her phone charger. I knew she'd see it. I knew she'd recognize my handwriting. I wanted her to. Then I left. There was no dramatic exit. No slamming door. Just the soft click of a deadbolt behind me and the sound of my own breathing. Back at the apartment, I didn't unpack. I just sat on the floor with my back against the wall and stared at nothing for a while. The silence wasn't peaceful, but it was honest. That was enough. The hours passed. I turned my phone off. Not because I expected a flood of texts or calls, but because I didn't want to give her the power to decide when the conversation would start. I didn't need answers anymore. I had evidence. And sometimes that's worse. By nightfall, I was starving. I walked 2 blocks to a tiny diner that smelled like burnt toast and coffee grounds. The waitress didn't ask questions. She just took my order and brought me pancakes even though it was 9 p.m. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I was over it. Not because the pain had dulled, but because, for the first time since it started, I wasn't waiting. Waiting for her to tell me the truth. Waiting for her to come home when she said she would. Waiting for the next excuse, the next half apology, the next moment of clarity that would never come. I had stopped waiting. And in that choice, I had taken something back, not my marriage, not my pride. Just myself. It took her 2 days. 2 full days of silence. No calls. No texts. No, where are you or can we talk? That used to mean something, didn't it? When your spouse vanished and you didn't even check to see if they were alive. But the thing was, I wasn't surprised. That was Brooke's style. She didn't chase. She'd always been the type to wait people out, to let the room come to her. Control wasn't about noise for her. It was subtle. Calculated. If you wanted her attention, you had to earn it. If you wanted her forgiveness, you had to bleed for it. I used to admire that about her. The way she never seemed desperate. Now, it made my stomach turn. I spent those 2 days in the apartment above the bookstore, learning how to exist without constantly expecting the other shoe to drop. It was quiet. Lonely, yes, but the kind of loneliness that felt honest. Clean. The kind that made you confront yourself in the mirror and ask, who am I when no one's watching? I didn't shave. I barely ate. I rewatched the same 3 episodes of a crime series I used to love and found none of it interesting anymore. I took long walks with no destination and avoided the streets near the house. I didn't want to see it. Not yet. But on the 3rd morning, she showed up. I was making coffee, instant, terrible, but warm. The knock at the door was soft. Hesitant. Not the kind you expect from someone who thinks they still have rights to your time. When I opened it, she was standing there. No makeup. Hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered to do anything with it. She wore an old hoodie that I hadn't seen in months. It used to be mine years ago. Now it looked like armor she didn't know how to take off. Her eyes were red. Not the kind of red you get from a bad night's sleep, but the kind that comes after you've cried for so long your face forgets what normal looks like. "Hi," she said, barely above a whisper. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let her in. She walked slowly, like the room might reject her presence. She stood in the middle of the apartment, turning in a slow circle as if she couldn't quite believe I was living there. "This is small," she said finally, her voice brittle. "It's mine," I said. She nodded, not making eye contact. "I read your letter." I waited. "I didn't know what to say," she added after a beat. "I still don't." Still, I said nothing. I didn't owe her the comfort of filling the silence anymore. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," she admitted, her voice cracking at the edge. "I thought maybe you'd be angry, or shut down, or disappear for a night like before. But not this. Not gone." Now I looked at her. Gone. As if I'd vanished on a whim. As if I hadn't spent the last year losing pieces of myself in small, forgettable ways. All while she looked me in the eye and swore everything was fine. She wasn't crying. Not really. There were tears, yes, but this wasn't grief. This was panic. And not the kind born from guilt, either. Brooke wasn't falling apart because she hurt me. She was falling apart because she realized something that terrified her. The man she thought would always be there wasn't. I crossed my arms. "Why are you here?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Swallowed. "I don't know." I nodded. "That's what I figured." Silence again. I walked back to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee. She didn't ask for any. She just stood there, like she was afraid to sit, like the ground wasn't stable beneath her anymore. "Who is he?" I asked finally. She flinched. "I don't want the long version," I said. "Just a name." Her eyes darted away. "His name is Caleb." The name meant nothing to me. No face, no history. That somehow made it worse. It wasn't even someone we knew. It wasn't some old friend, or an unresolved chapter from her past. It was a stranger she chose over me. A life she auditioned for while I was out shopping for our anniversary wine. "How long?" I asked. She didn't answer. "How long?" I repeated. "Almost a year," she said, staring at the floor. "But it didn't start the way you think." I let out a humorless laugh. "Of course it didn't. He was just someone I talked to," she went on, her voice quickening. "Someone I met at a gallery showing. We started texting. Felt harmless. I didn't even think of it as a thing. Not at first." "Did it feel harmless when you were with him in our house?" I asked. She looked up at that. Finally. "No," she said. "I don't have an excuse for that." I nodded slowly. "Good. Don't make one." She sat down on the edge of the bed. Her hands shook as she tried to press her palms together, as if that might stop the trembling. "I didn't mean for it to become anything," she whispered. "But it did." "Yes. You said you didn't think I'd leave," I said. "Why?" She looked at me like a child who'd been caught lying, not even bothering to deny it. "Because you always stay," she said. "Even when I'm cold. Even when I pull away. Even when I forget what day it is or cancel plans or come home late. You always stay." There it was. The truth she hadn't said until now. Her voice trembled. "I thought I could fix it before it got too far. That I could stop and pretend it didn't mean anything. But I was wrong. You thought I'd wait forever," I said flatly. She didn't argue. She just cried. And for the first time, I didn't feel moved by it. I didn't feel sorry or sympathetic or tempted to rush to her side. Her grief wasn't for me. It was for the certainty she had lost, the illusion that I would always be her safety net, even when she set fire to the rope. "I never stopped loving you," she said softly. I shook my head. "Maybe not. But you did stop choosing me." She broke down then, full on sobbing, her shoulders shaking under the weight of the consequences she never expected to face. I stood across the room, watching her cry on a bed that didn't belong to us in a life she never thought she'd be excluded from. And I didn't go to her. Because some things you walk through. And some things you walk away from. This was both.